I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Hello, everyone. And welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Here we are once again together to chat about the wide, wonderful world of real estate. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome to it. Glad to have you. If you'd like to join the Rebel Underground, super easy to do. You can simply text the word Rebel Broker, the number 44222. That's text the word Rebel Broker to the number 44222. You'll get a response to let you know that you've successfully reached me. If you prefer, you can head on over to the website, therebelbroker.com, and there are tools right there to reach out and join the Rebel Underground. I don't abuse you. As anyone who's in the Rebel Underground knows, stuff does not go out all the time. It's one of those things where I have great plans. You know, I want to disseminate a lot of really cool information, but you know, there's only so many hours in the day, so you're really only going to get interesting stuff. You're not going to get what I had for lunch. You're not going to get deluged with silly marketing stuff, and I don't give your email address out to anybody, so you're not going to suddenly end up on a bunch of crazy lists where you're going to get garbage in your inbox, because I hate that stuff as much as you do, so I'm not going to put you through what I can't stand. Today, we're going to, this is the season, right? So the season we are in now is what to expect for 2020, and that's something we're definitely going to do. This is a little bit more maybe not nuanced. Maybe nuanced isn't the right word. But we're going to cover an article that came out from Redfin, released on their blog on November 15th. I've read through it, and I don't know if I feel like sharing it because it agrees with things I've already said, or because it's really insightful. But you know, it's always super important to consider sources on these things. But to their credit, Redfin seems to be shooting pretty straight on these things. But folks who've been listening for a while know I haven't always been a huge fan of the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors. I often find that organization, while I am a member and happy to uphold the standards, the high, lofty standards of the National Association, I do find that with any organization, it is probably smart to understand how their bread gets buttered, right? A robust real estate marketplace is what folks like the National Association want, because they want more people becoming real estate agents, right? Because they make their money through that. They make their money through dues, which real estate agents pay every year. They make their money through all the additional stuff, because it's not just dues, it's then also paying your local MLS. I have to pay a national fee. I have to pay a local fee. I got to pay to be able to use the magic realtor lockbox and key so that we can all get access to properties. So there's a whole lot of stuff wrapped into this. And more realtors means more money for the association. So just understanding how that particular animal gets fed, I think, is important when you're looking at reports from them relating to what kind of a feeling they leave you with about real estate. And over the course of the downturn, I had critical things to say about certain data, or not data, interpretations of data that were shared that tried to paint the rosiest picture possible. But we're going to jump into this article from Redfin. I will have a link to their article in the show notes at therebelbroker.com. So if you want to check those out, feel free to head on over. A lot of things are in the works right now. The website is going to be getting a facelift. I just today got the staging environment set up for the new site. So there's a lot of work's going to get going there. And the great news is it won't affect the site for you. It means basically that the site gets built independent of its actual public-facing endpoint or URL. and a new one gets created. I'm also doing the same thing for my soldbyrobert.com site or the White Lawn Sun site. If you ever feel like you could use the services of what I consider to be a pretty darn good real estate broker and agent, which is me in Silicon Valley, I'm also happy to help with any needs you might have, whether it's buying, selling, or investing. Or if you just want to chat about it, you want to head over to Starbucks and talk real estate, that's one of the things I like to geek out on. So I'm happy to do that too. So let's jump in. I get this question a lot, whether I am online at Starbucks, for instance, or I am showing a house and folks are just chatting. This is one of the things that comes up the most. Can we expect a downturn in the housing market? Now, it's not a question of whether or not there's going to be a recession. A recession is going to happen. Can't guarantee it's going to happen in 2020. But I think that the odds are fairly good that we will have a recession sometime real soon. It'll be interesting to see how the timing is. There's a whole lot of other elements that play into this, right? The government, or at least most elements of the government, are going to fight tooth and nail to keep an actual recession from happening before the elections, right? We've seen this before in past elections. During the downturn, after the downturn, there's going to be a lot of government effort put into doing whatever is necessary to at least delay in a recession that comes. And let's also be honest. I realize there are folks with flags on both sides of this argument. Recessions happen. They are a natural part of the process. Just like Simba said, it's the circle of life, right? And that's part of it. Companies are supposed to get born, they're supposed to grow, and at some point they're supposed to die. Same thing, and that process of renewal, of life-giving renewal to the business world, happens in the form of recessions and all these other kinds of things that aren't great. And the goal is to just make them more mild. We don't want things that are absolute crashes, right? You want things that are a little bit more subtle, a little bit more nuanced, maybe, so that not entire segments of economies are blown up in the process. Okay. So I think I'm going to hit this point by point. I'll give sort of my take and what their take is. They've got it phrased as questions, so they got a header as a question and then they answer it. My answers are going to, I think, sync up pretty good with their answers. I'll probably offer a little bit more special rebel broker mojo on each one of these answers because that's what I do. The first question is, what's happening in the economy right now that's fueling talk of a recession? Now, this is a really good question. If you track unemployment numbers and if you subscribe to my Twitter feed or you follow me on Facebook or any of those wonderful places, you know that I frequently will tweet out the latest stats as it relates to unemployment. We're doing great. For the purposes of statistics, we're at full employment, right? I know I've heard folks argue anything under 5% is considered quote unquote full employment. I've heard under 4%. And let's also keep in mind that what equals a unemployed person kind of evolves over the decades, right? People will play with how those numbers are calculated for whatever reason they may have. Whether you are a president who is in a very bad situation and unemployment is super high, and you need things to look better, so you tweak the numbers. That's happened on both sides of the aisle, so it's really not a Republican-Democrat thing, but it is a thing. So that's one reason why I like to go to other sources. There's actually, I think, 4 or 5 ways to calculate the unemployment number. And for a while there, when we were really at the worst of this, the unemployment number that was being reported was 7%, 8%, 9%, and it was really closer to 20%. So, and I'm not talking about conspiracy theory numbers. I'm actually talking about the numbers that are put out by the government. So you can actually Google those if you like and track them down. Now, so unemployment isn't a huge thing. The big thing that's feeding the fragility of the economy right now is global stuff, right? It's trade wars with China. It's tensions, political tensions that would feed into affecting economic interests. One thing they mention here is a contracting manufacturing sector. Our manufacturing sector, I guess, is part of it, but I really think the other two things are the lion's share of this. And for some perspective, no, maybe perspective isn't useful. I don't want to divide the room. I don't want the R's and the D's either continuing to listen or stopping listening because of a lot of this. there is a lot of economic inequality in the world, and believe it or not, it is usually not the United States taking advantage of another country. It is usually the United States giving far more beneficial trade allowances to other partners. In other words, we're letting them put tariffs on our stuff, but we don't put it on theirs. That's one of the things that politically has come up with the current administration is we have a lot of trade agreements or current trade practices that are in place that really kind of hose us. It makes it really difficult for a lot of American companies to sell in China, for instance, because of the tariffs that were in place long before we ever talked about putting tariffs on their stuff. I'm an anti-tariff guy across the board. I am not. I don't think tariffs win. I've mentioned before, I majored in history in college. I know what happened in the 20s and 30s, and tariffs just don't tend to yield good things. But I also believe that goes two ways, right? There shouldn't be tariffs on our stuff going to other places, and we shouldn't be charging tariffs on other folks' stuff. So I guess if you believe that is a fair thing, then maybe having laws that say whatever tariffs you put on our stuff, we'll put on your stuff, right? To equal it out. That's a topic for another time. The long and the short of it, though, is that these are causing frictions that feed both economic and political problems that are what are feeding the concerns that we're going to see a recession coming up. Now, bear in mind that have been talking about a recession before these tensions, right? Because remember, we're on a cycle. We tend to be on an 8-year cycle. If you think back to what happened 8 years ago, you realize that the recession, we're actually later than we should have been for another recession, right? The 2007 timeframe is when all this stuff went down. Now, if you consider that sort of a slow motion recession where it actually lasted for several years, it was the end of 2006 up through 2008, which would have meant we would have expected another recession by 2016, right? And we really haven't had anything that would fit the bill. So we've been expecting it for a while. I know on this show we've talked a lot about different numbers over the course of the years and will it happen this year or next year? And I've oftentimes, when I've done 18 months or more estimations, I've said, it'll be interesting to see what happens based on what's happening now as to how that feeds the monster in 18 months. But we've been pretty good on this show about estimating things that are happening in 6 to 12 months. I did put one stake in the ground, I think, relating to stock market prices, in estimating that they were going to take a huge dump and it might be the beginning of the recession, and we ended up having the most stable October ever. So I'll call myself out for that one. But in any event, the next question is, will there be a recession in 2020? Now, they say that there's a 1 in 4 chance of a recession in the next 12 months. Okay. There are a variety of opinions on that. I think if this was just any random year, I think that would be a reasonable number to throw out there, but this isn't, right? 2020 is an election year. You have all of the huge gorilla in the room weight behind not allowing a perceived downturn to happen. So here's what I think's gonna happen. And then this is a little bit of blending of the political and the economic. I believe that no matter what's happening in 2020, as we roll up to the election, there will be a lot of lip service given to how bad the economy is. Whether the economy is bad or not will be a completely different thing. Everyone will want to point to something, right? But really, all the economic indicators right now are good, but that doesn't seem to shift the conversation. Really, nobody seems to cover the positive information that comes out relating to how the economy is doing. Not going to talk about who deserves the credit or doesn't deserve the credit, but where we are in terms of where the numbers are now is good, and it's a lot better than it's been in number. If you go back over 10 years, 15 years, these numbers are better than we've seen in an awful long time. Okay, but that's based on things like consumer spending, manufacturing, exports, imports, and government spending, according to this article. According to this, if you look at just the financial sector, the odds are 1 in 2 or a 50% chance. And I'm not sure I buy that one. The underpinnings of the financial sector, I mean, we need to really look back. Now, one thing to really get wrapped around in your head is that the likelihood of us having a 2007, 2008 style downturn is not high. Because the source of that downturn was real estate, right? It happened in the lending sector. It was all about foreclosures. It was about really stupid lending. And something I've mentioned before on this show, for those of you who've been here a while, you may remember this. It was a repeated topic over the course of at least a year and a half. We are doing a lot of really dumb lending again. If you want to go back and do a search on past shows where I've talked about what led up to the downturn, you can go all the way back to 1972 and start there with the Community Reinvestment Act, work your way up to 1994 and see the next big change there, and then go up to 1989, 1999, 1998, 1999, and 2000. And that's when all of those bricks were getting laid that really built the house of cards that fell down in 2007, 2008. If anyone cares, I'll be happy to do a show on that again at some point, where if you want to do a little story time with the Rebel Broker. I don't buy the 1 and 2 for the financial sector. I think that there is a chance probably on par with the 1 and 4. Not sure I'm buying the 1 and 2. I'll need to look at more data before I buy that 1 and 2 scenario, because that would imply other things. Now, the financial sector does not necessarily equal housing, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily equal the source of the problem is loans and mortgages. It could be a bunch of other things. It could be the fact that we're printing so much money. It could be we're buying our debt, right? There's a lot of different things that are creepy and scary that don't have a whole lot to do with your house that would fall under the whole financial sector umbrella. So I think, though, that fundamentally the financial sector is bolstered by good employment, sales, consumer spend, all the things that we know are good. All the financial sector relies on economic indicators, which we think only has a 1 in 4 chance of having a problem. And the overall economic picture is 1 in 4. The financial sector, the lending sector. Now, if something bad happens there, what does that equal? I'm not sure that necessarily equals anything as it pertains specifically to housing prices. It might mean that folks in the financial sector lose jobs, right? And that is something that we would need to be interested in. But I don't necessarily think that that's something that ends up having a widespread impact. Now, the next question is, how did housing impact a 2008 recession, and what were the ripple effects on homeowners and home prices? Now, they point out what I've already pointed out, that it was focused on housing. It was a foreclosure problem. There was a bubble. Home prices peaked around 2006, and then we had a national drop of 17%, with quite a bit more than that in many areas. Now, this is something else we've talked about on this show, where when we were talking about investment properties a couple of years ago and talking about looking at the history, if you want to minimize your risk, find areas that really didn't see much of a blip through the downturn. There's tons of them all across the country. The areas that tended to get hit were the coastal areas, right? So here was one of those areas. And we had communities here in Gilroy and Morgan Hill that saw losses in value of closer to 30%. At certain price ranges, if you had homes that were above $1.3 million, you were seeing some of those homes dropping by as much as 40%. So, it really depended on where you were, but that 17% was the national average. It brought down the housing sector even further. It also rippled into the financial sector and spread rapidly to create the 2008 Great Recession. Okay, so housing was the source of it, and at the core of that was very stupid lending practices. I've described where we are now as the opposite side of the same coin. Back then, from 2000 up until 2007, we would see folks, we would do, no doc loans, right? Where you don't necessarily have to prove your income. We would say, well, it's okay if you have a low credit rating or if you have these problems. We would just write the loan. Well, now we made all these rules to not do that, but now we're doing it the other way. Now, the metrics that we use to measure whether or not you are a good risk for a loan, we're tweaking them. So, maybe a lot of you don't know. Again, these are all things we've done shows about here. If you see what they've changed, we now can do 3% loans again. We can now do 1% loans again. There are no doc loans. There are loans that you can merge with your school loans, with your college loans. that turns it into a mortgage, which is a monumentally stupid thing to do, by the way. If you're someone who's thinking about doing that, if you don't know why it's stupid, go to therebelbroker.com, send me an email. I'll be happy to explain to you why it's stupid. Did a show a year and a half, 2 years ago on why that's dumb. But we've also watered down credit ratings. Now, a lot of things that would normally have affected your credit negatively are not included or removed from your credit rating. Medical judgments or bills, those types of things you haven't paid, and things that shouldn't feed your credit rating and make it higher are doing that, like your electric bill and your water bill. Why? Well, that's not a loan. The bottom line is you stop paying your water bill, your water gets turned off. So you're not, you may be out a very short chunk of water, but that's not really something that should feed your lending. So what we've done is instead of saying we'll just put up with really bad credit stuff, we've now flipped the coin to we will redefine what good credit is to downgrade it so that people who would normally not qualify for a loan do qualify for a loan. That's happening rampantly. We've talked about it tons on this show. So we are definitely priming the same pump that caused the recession last time, but not at the rate that we were before. And the other primary reason why we won't see a recession like 2008 is because we haven't built enough homes. Populations have still been growing in these areas, but if you look at the rate at which homes were being built, and we're up until 2006, 2007, it took a huge dive, dropped all the way to the floor, and we never, ever approached the number of homes being built as we did back before the bubble. We're still at below 25% of the number of homes that were being built per year when compared to the bubble. So if you look at that particular chart, that sucker goes all the way up to being a giant mountain and just drops like a rock. So we haven't, there's not enough of the new homes built and lent on that would feed that kind of a downturn. Okay. Will housing prices drop in a recession? A lot of people seem to instantly equate home prices with a recession. And we've gone through tons of recessions where that didn't happen. I was through a recession in the 90s where prices went up during the recession. If home prices drop, it's not going to be significant. And it may simply be as subtle as a flattening. Now, a lot of people would argue we're already in sort of a flattening, but we're in a flattening trend, meaning that, each year or each month compared to the month the previous year, we're seeing, well, we only got 5% increase in home values year over year, and now we only got 4%, and now we only got 3.8%, right? It's that. So it's tending towards flattening, but it isn't flat yet. Nobody in the area where I live is paying the same price for a house today that they would have paid for the exact same house a year ago, right? They're still paying some sort of a premium from, 2 to 6%, depending on where they are. Now, they estimate in this article, as an answer to this question, that if prices do fall, the most they would fall would be 4 to 6% if they fall at all. I don't disagree with that. I think if we were to pick a national number, it could be 4 to 6%. But just like 17% does not accurately reflect certain segments of the country, I think if we see a recession, and it depends on what kind of recession it is, right? We had the tech bubble that burst in right after 2000. We've had all kinds of other bubbles that were focused on different marketplaces. The 2000 bubble hit the housing market, but it also hit the BMW market. Right? That was probably the best time in the history of California to buy a BMW because of all the BMWs that have been repossessed from all the tech folks that had lost their jobs in the tech crash. So it's going to depend on the circumstances. That 4 to 6%, let's take worst case 6%. If it does end up being something that hits housing in a broad way, and if it's something that it ends up hitting the coasts, you would likely see that number be bigger in a community like mine, right? So without having a little bit more data on what kind of recession this might be, where it might come from, it's difficult to estimate. But I think worst case scenario for most folks out there is your house isn't going to lose more than 6%, if at all. And I'd actually lean more towards flat or not at all. The next question they address in this article is, what are economic indicators that could predict a recession? This is a pretty good one. I'm going to actually just read this one for you. Most risks to the U.S. economy come from outside the U.S. economy, such as trade wars or global weakness, which could spill over to the United States. That could cause a recession because if we're not exporting enough, people may lose their jobs. Even just the threat of job loss is enough to keep consumers from spending, which could also cause a recession. But the next recession won't start in the housing market. Yes, home prices are high, but that's due to lack of inventory and fundamental economic reasons, not speculation, not a speculation real estate bubble. We could talk a lot more about that last sentence alone. I do tend to believe it is not going to come from the housing market for the reasons I already talked about. The stage just isn't set for that to happen. But we'll have to, and I agree that there's a lot of the international outside of our borders thing happening. But again, I'm dubious of the high probability that they give that something's going to happen over the next year. Now, finally, they hit not finally, there's actually one more after this. What advice would you give to home buyers and home sellers right now? They go on to say, don't try to time your decision based on speculation. Look at your own personal financial situation. Ask yourself if you'll still be able to afford the home if you lost your job. Those kinds of things. How long can you maintain your mortgage payments? If you're looking to sell, ask yourself the same questions. If you think your budget is going to be significantly stretched, if you hold on to the home, now might be a good time to sell. So here's what I would say. Whatever decision you're going to make relating to your real estate, if you're a buyer, just make sure that you are thinking in terms of, I am going to buy this and I'm going to keep it for at least 5 years. If you're pinning your hopes on a lot of increase in property value, if you're right up against your maximum purchasing approval rating, don't do that, right? Anybody who was able to weather the financial downturn came out okay, right? Prices recovered and then some, at least in my local area. I mean, I can show you a chart because I guess there's a lot of I have some listeners who occasionally will say, they still haven't recovered to the peak in my area. And while that might absolutely be the case, for the average price, for instance, in Morgan Hill, peaked at something like $700,000 or $800,000 at the peak, and now it's way above. I mean, we're over $1 million. So I mean, and I think when I did for all of Santa Clara County, it was those kinds of numbers. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars above where it had, and that's the average of where it had been at the peak of the bubble. So it really depends on where you are. So it's on this show. I have a hard time sometimes trying to give you great advice. Particularly when I use specifics, because I don't want to give you the wrong idea. The specifics that I use, I intend for you to be able to take the mechanics of what I'm talking about and apply it to your situation, which is why I'm hedging my bets a little bit by telling you, 17% may have been the average for the country. Your mileage may vary. Okay, so to get back on track here, what advice would I give to home buyers? Just get into a situation with some longevity to it, where your plan is to be there a long while. I would prefer that you buy something where you've got headroom, where you can save money. And in addition to that, have a cash reserve. If a recession happens, your best friend is cash. And and my suggestion is to have 6 months. And I say 6 months, and people just go, well, I don't have 6 months worth of money. There's no way. I think that you should make an effort to make that possible. If you lose your job, 6 months is more than a reasonable amount of time, I think, to find one. Of course, it depends on the nature of the recession, right? If the recession hits, if you are the soft, chewy center of the recession, right? Let's say you are a street cleaner and the recession is focused on the street cleaning world, well, then that stinks, because you're going to have to not only spend time finding a new job, but probably having to find new skills. So 6 months gives you that opportunity to, in the worst case scenario, not only look for a new job, but potentially acquire new skills to get that new job. So I always suggest to folks, I know 3 months is good, 6 months is better. And I strongly suggest that's something that you try to make happen. Okay, so as I mentioned, this comes to us from Redfin. I will be including the link to this article in the show notes for today's show. What do you think? What do you think about what I had to say? as the Rebel Broker on these. What do you think about what Redfin had to say on these? What do you think that their estimation that we have a 50% chance of having a downturn or a recession in the financial sector is accurate? I don't tend to think that. Now, I didn't go off and research this specific claim from them in this article, but I do read financial articles every day. Part of my normal morning routine is I have a lovely RSS feed where I subscribe to dozens of different financial institutions, and a lot of it focusing on real estate. But as you know, if you watch my Twitter feed again, I tweet out a lot of this stuff relating to the economics of the country. So I don't see the 1 and 2 that they see, but I'm sure there are folks out there that think that that's a thing. But as always, the goal here is to leave you with more information than you invest time in hearing that information. I hope I've achieved that today. And I would, again, love to hear back from you on your feedback relating to this. What do you think? Do you think this will affect you? What part of the country are you in? What do you see in your local areas? Do you have any feelings on where we're going to get the next recession? Maybe you want to lay some bets on where the recession will come from when it does finally come, whether that's next year or the following year or the year after that. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd love to share that with me, head on over to therebelbroker.com, click on Contact the Rebel, send along your ideas, information, suggestions, whatever you want to share with me. I'm happy to hear it. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to y'all next time.